Amen. Well, good morning, everybody. You can take a seat. My name is Mike Howard. I'm the lead pastor here at Revision, and I am so pumped to be here with all of you celebrating the fact that Jesus is risen. Thank you for braving the cold. Thanks for braving the early time and being the early service. So I want to kick things off this Easter by getting real raw and deep real quick, because that's how we do it here at Revision. We're authentic. How many of you have ever cried during The Lion King? How many of you cold, heartless people have not cried during The Lion King? Okay, I've never in my life wanted to be someone who cries about cartoons or any sort of fictional movie or thing, but I remember the first time I ever saw Lion King, I was 11. I saw it as the double feature in the theater with Angels in the Outfield, and that moment, you know the moment when Mufasa gets trampled by the herd of wildebeest and Simba's like pushing on him, and this one right here, and he doesn't move? Don't tell me you didn't get something in your eye. And I've been thinking about it and realizing that over time, as I watch it, my excuses for, why I'm doing this just keep changing. Like when I was 11 and my little brother looked at me and I wanted to be like the tough older brother. I was like, what? The lady behind me dropped popcorn on my foot. It hurts, And then in college, when my roommate busted in on me watching it and said, "Are you crying?" And you're like, "A girlfriend broke up with me." That's not true. Mufasa's dead, man. And then, even a year ago, when my 10-year-old kid looked at me, I'm like, are you crying? Grandma died. I didn't tell you. But it's such a powerful moment. This moment when Mufasa dies and Simba's pushing on him, I think is really relatable. And let me explain. As Simba looks at his father's lifeless body, what does he see? He sees his own failure. Because this whole situation happened because he disobeyed. His express and intentional disobedience of his father's will left him in a spot where unless somebody came to save him, he was in huge trouble. And there were bigger forces at play, but Simba didn't know that. All he could see when he looked at Mufasa lying there was his own mistake. And so what did he do? He ran away. He ran, and did he run to this life of violence and evil? Did he become the meanest lion on the Pride Lands, killing everything, being awful, causing trouble? No. He just ran as far away as he could possibly get until he thought he was far away enough that no one would ever find him. And he befriended a couple happy idiots, decided that bugs taste just as good as the steaks he was used to. And he did his best to just surround himself with comfort, miles away from where he was meant to be, hiding from a world that was desperate for him to engage. I can't help but wonder this morning how many of us are in a similar boat. We look in the mirror and what do we see? We see our failures. We look in the mirror and we see all the pain and all the mistakes and the brokenness of our past. And so many of us can't help but come to the conclusion as we're looking at us, you know what, maybe I am too far gone. And most of us don't take that thought and decide, well, I guess now I'm going to go out and just become something terrible and horrible and awful, like a bank robber, a serial killer, a lawyer. There are some things that are a step too far. But we do decide somewhere deep inside our souls that God could not possibly look at us with love anymore. He couldn't possibly be for us because of the things that we've done. And we decide maybe I just need to settle. Maybe I'm just going to chase comfort and decide that whatever this is all that life is about, and some sort of meaning. That whole God thing is for somebody else. It's got to be for those people because it can't be for me. And I want to ask the question this morning, how does God see you? How is God looking at you right now, right in the middle of your failures, as you've walked away from the life he says he created you for? I want to lean into that this morning. We're going to do that by looking at the story of another failed human being who made some mistakes in his life. A guy who ran away and gave up on himself, a guy who was ready to settle for a life that was less than the life God said he was made for, a guy who had those same questions. How does God see me? What does God think about me? And came to the same conclusion that so many of us have come to. He's a guy named Peter. And if you're not familiar with the Bible, Peter is like one of Jesus' OGs. He's one of the 12 disciples, one of his best friends. And he was a dude who had like a full heart and a half brain. Peter was always charging ahead, just usually in the wrong direction. Okay? And to understand the interaction and the conversation that Jesus and Peter have that we're going to talk about this morning, which happened after the resurrection, we kind of got to understand what led up to it. And so before we even dive in to that, we're going to rewind 2 weeks and get the context. And the night before Jesus got arrested, he knew what was coming, but nobody else did. And so he's praying in a garden, and he asked Peter and some of his other guys, like, hey, would you stay up and pray with me? But Peter kept falling asleep. And then this big old mob came to arrest Jesus, and Peter, again, charging ahead just in the wrong direction, went into protection mode. But because he was a disorganized idiot, instead of drawing his sword, he pulled out his fishing knife and swung on a guy, tried to end him, cut off his ear, totally missed. And Jesus picked up the ear, put it back on the guy, and looked at Peter like, dude, are you kidding me? And then he got led away to be put on trial. And so, of course, Peter and all Jesus' other friends, all the disciples, they went to go watch the trial, but it was not going well. Because the religious authorities of the day, note, not all the messed up people, not all the people who thought, hey, I'm too far gone, the really religious ones who thought they were righteous were determined to have Jesus killed. Okay, and during this whole process of watching the trial and sticking around, seeing what happens, Peter gets recognized a few times. This guy comes up to him and is like, hey, aren't you one of Jesus' buddies? He says, no. A soldier comes up to him, this Roman centurion, hey, you were with Jesus. And Peter's looking out for number one. Okay, the trial's not going well. Peter's not about to get arrested. He's not about to have that soldier stab him. So he's like, no way. I don't know. And at one point, Peter is standing around a fire with a bunch of other people trying to keep his hands warm. And this little girl comes up to him and is like, hey, you were with Jesus? And he says, I swear, I've never even met him. And he starts, like cussing again. So everyone will be like, oh yeah, he's a bad guy. He couldn't have been around Jesus. And then something happens. Right in this exact moment where Peter denies Jesus for the third time that night, a rooster crows. And he looks up across the courtyard, and his eyes meet the eyes of Jesus staring right at him. You know what Peter does? He runs. He runs away, and he hides, and he cries. And it gets worse from there. Like, not only is this the last interaction he has with Jesus, then Jesus gets killed. This guy that he spent the last 3 years of his life believing in and trusting and following is dead. It's the cherry on top of Peter's terrible week. He's gone. And all this hope that had been living inside Peter, that Jesus was going to do something big, that Jesus had a purpose for him, shriveled up and died inside of him in that moment. And he had to live with the knowledge that the last interaction he would ever have with his friend is the one where they both knew Peter denied ever having met him. Peter's wrecked. He's wrecked. And he's sitting around, and 3 days later, these women come up. They come running in the room. They're like, Peter, the tomb is empty. There's no body in there. The first thought through Peter's mind is, yeah, right. And the second thought is, someone must have stole it. So he stands up and he sprints to the tomb and he runs inside and there's no body there. But let me tell you this, the first thought through Peter's mind wasn't, he's alive again. The first thought through Peter's mind was, what the heck? What's going on? I don't even know how to process this. Who stole the body? Because listen, nobody expected nobody. Not Peter, not the disciples, not Jesus' followers. Nobody expected no body. And so Peter gets there and he doesn't even really understand how to process what's happened. And then these angels appear to another few women and they tell him, hey, why don't you go tell the disciples and Peter that Jesus is alive and he wants to meet them in Galilee. And quick question, why do you think the Bible, Mark, he wasn't even one of the disciples, he writes down the angel said the disciples and Peter. Peter was a disciple. He was part of that crew. It would have worked to just say the disciples. Here's what I think. I think if Peter didn't get invited specifically, he wasn't going to go. Like at this point, as Peter thought about who he was and what he'd done and how he had turned his back on his friend in his worst moment, Peter thought he was out. He was convinced with every fiber of his being that he had sacrificed his identity, that he had given up his future, that he was not a part of the club anymore. He would have looked at everybody else and figured, oh, maybe they're in. Maybe Jesus wants to see them, but there's no way he wants to see me. I'm not invited. And that's why the angels had to say the disciples and Peter, because otherwise he wasn't showing up. He wasn't showing up. And here's what happened when he did. If you have Bibles with you this morning, you can open them up to the book of John, chapter 21. If you don't have a Bible, you can follow along on the screen. If you don't own one, we have a bunch of them, a bunch of different colors at the Next Steps table. We have kids versions, big kids and little kids for your kids. We would love for you to just take them. You don't have to sign up or talk to anybody on your way out. We've given away hundreds and hundreds of them over the last couple of years. Just snag some, however many you need. All right, but this is what it says in John 21, starting in verse 2. Remember, these guys got told Jesus is not dead. The reason there's no body in the tomb is he's alive, and he wants to meet you at Galilee. So it says Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, it means twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. We got to understand something about what's happening when Peter says the words, I'm going to fish. If I told my wife, hey, Jenny, I'm going to play basketball, she would assume that I'm headed to the park or the YMCA to attempt vainly to put a leather ball through a hoop, because that's what it means when I say I'm going to play basketball. But in March of 1995, in maybe the greatest moment of my young life as a sports fan, his airness, Michael Jordan, sat down in front of a microphone and said, I'm going to play basketball, and then nobody think he was going to the park. When Peter says, I'm going fishing, it doesn't mean, hey, I figured Jesus is coming. He's not here yet. I'm just going to kill some time off the end of the dock trying to snag a few bluegill. Peter's a professional fisherman. Until the moment when Jesus called him literally right out of his boat, that's what Peter did. That's what Peter knew. When he looks at the other disciples, he says, fellas, I'm going to fish. What he's telling them is look, he ain't coming. I don't understand anything that's happened in the last 2 weeks. I don't get it. And I know Jesus appeared to Mary and a few disciples on a road, and one time he showed up in a room, but we were supposed to meet him here. He's not coming. I'm making a career change. I thought he had this big plan for my life. I thought he had this big plan for all of our lives, but it's dead. He's gone. And it's time for us to figure out how to get comfortable, how to do whatever it is we need to do to live for the rest of our lives. I'm getting in the boat. And John writes that the rest of them looked at Peter and said, yeah, man, that's a good idea. We'll go fishing too. And so they hopped in a professional fishing boat with professional fishing nets, and they went to catch fish, and they caught nothing. Which is a detail of this story that doesn't make a bit of sense, because these guys are not amateurs. There's only one way in the world that they sail out into the Sea of Galilee, a sea that they had fished on their entire lives, and catch nothing. The God who controls the universe is messing with them. He does that. He'll do it to you too. It's what he does. If you believe for a second that the God who created you, that the God who said he has a purpose for you, that the God who was willing to come and die for you is just going to let you walk away and not chase you down, you're crazy, because he's not. He's not. I got 2 twin 3-year-olds. If one of them ran into the street, right, there's nothing in me that'd be like, well, I should go after, I want to chase. I got to let him make his own decisions. I'll let him go. I got a spare over here anyway. No, I'm going after him. Now, he can keep running away. He has that ability and he has that volition, but whatever it costs me, even if it hurts, I'm chasing that kid, and that's what God's doing for you. And there are a couple things I want us to see in this story, because I'm convinced that what the resurrected Jesus is doing for Peter right here, right now, is the exact same thing the resurrected Jesus wants to do for you and me. And the first one is this: Jesus chases you. Jesus chases you. Here's what it looked like for Peter. In verse 4, John writes this: early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but his disciples did not realize it was Jesus, and he called out to them, and this is more sarcastic in the Greek than in the English. Hey, fellas, you don't have any fish, do you? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. A quick timeout. These guys have been hanging out with Jesus every day for 3 years, and he's standing on the beach. The boat isn't even that far. John tells us it's 100 yards offshore, and they didn't realize it was Jesus standing there talking to them. How? Why? What is going on? I think it's pretty simple. They didn't see that it was Jesus standing on the beach for the same reason so many of us don't see Jesus in our lives, even though he's right there calling out to us. They weren't looking for Jesus on the beach because they weren't sure that Jesus was alive and looking for them. And they'd seen his lifeless body, and they'd heard that he was alive, they'd even seen him, but they're thinking, do we eat bad fish because he's gone? I don't have any idea what is going on. And let's be clear about one thing. If they were certain that Jesus was alive and that Jesus had done what Jesus said he was going to do, they would not be sitting in the stinking boat. But there they are. If they believed, they'd be on a mission to tell everybody that God stepped out of eternity into history, and he took on human flesh, and he died to pay the price for our sins, and he rose again and conquered death so that we could live. But they just made a career change, and they're fishing because they don't believe it until this day. Until this day. And I want to briefly press pause on this bigger story that we're looking at and zoom in right here because this is huge. After this day, not one of them ever looked back. Not one. And the entire future of the world got changed dramatically by this ragtag crew of nobodies who had completely lost hope and given up before a risen Jesus showed up on the beach. There's some people in our world who want to argue that Jesus couldn't have risen, that's impossible, it can't happen. And they want to say that this whole idea that he's risen, this whole foundation of faith and Christianity is just a hoax. And it is impossible for dead men to live again unless you're God and death has no power over you. But I want you to understand this morning, believing that this is just a hoax takes just as much faith or more than it does to believe that it happened. Because these guys were done. They were done, and they were sitting in the boat headed toward a new and a different future. And they didn't suddenly decide to charge forward and give up their lives for fun. Just for kicks. They did it because they saw something happen. Thousands and thousands of other people did too. A few weeks after this story we're talking about today, Peter stood up in front of the entire city of Jerusalem. He said, they killed him. He rose again. We are all witnesses. You've seen him. You've seen a dead man walking. And if that was a lie and everybody wasn't witnesses, they would have said, nuh-uh. But thousands upon thousands of them said, yep, I'm all in on this. And they charged forward too. And they charted a completely different course for the human race. And they got persecuted and tortured and killed for it too. Nobody expected nobody, but there was nobody in the tomb. There was just a risen Jesus that they saw. And it changed everything for them. It can change everything for us too. I love the way a guy named Charles Colson explains it. He talks about his conversion from Christianity, or to Christianity, from atheism, and it happened because of the truth of the resurrection. At one point in his life, Colson was one of the most powerful men in the United States. He was high up at the top of the Nixon administration. And then he helped orchestrate and cover up the political espionage, the political espionage of the Watergate scandal, and he got put in prison for that. And while he was in prison, turns out he had some time to think, and he wrote this: I know the resurrection is a fact, and Watergate proved it to me. How? Because 12 men testified they had seen Jesus raised from the dead. Then they proclaimed that truth for 40 years, never once denying it. Everyone was beaten, tortured, stoned, and put in prison. They would not have endured that if it weren't true. Watergate embroiled 12 of the most powerful men in the world, and they couldn't keep alive for 3 weeks. You're telling me 12 apostles could keep alive for 40 years? Absolutely impossible. After this day, they never looked back. Zoom back out to the bigger story. We're in this moment between Jesus dying and his apostles being fully convinced that he's alive and understanding what it means for them. They're out fishing. They catch nothing. Some guy yells at them, try the other side. They do. They catch so many fish, the boat starts getting weighed down. And if you're familiar with the Bible, you might be like, hey, I remember that story. I think I've heard it. Maybe you have, but it might not have been this one. This isn't the first time this whole thing happened, where they're out fishing and they catch nothing and some guy yells at them to try the other side and a whole bunch of fish come in. We read about the first time in Luke 5. It's when Jesus first called Peter out of the boat. This is the beginning of the relationship of Jesus and Peter. And now, at the end, Jesus is recreating this moment of Peter's first calling because he wants Peter to realize something. Listen, Peter hasn't apologized to Jesus. He hasn't gotten his act together. He's the one who doubted that Jesus would even show up on the beach and convinced everybody else, he ain't coming, let's go fishing. He's all jacked up. And Jesus recreates the moment of his calling to say to Peter, Peter, I am chasing you in the middle of your mistakes. Listen, you guys, Jesus does not run from broken people. He doesn't run from people who are messed up. He runs to them. And right here, as soon as the whole try the other side thing works, they realize who that guy on shore is. And I love the way John tells the story next because he says as soon as they realize, oh, it's Jesus on the shore, Peter grabs his coat, throws it on, dives off the side of the boat, starts swimming. Peter goes full Forrest Gump on this. Okay? He sees Jesus and he's like, ah! Whoosh! And John, you can tell they're friends, and John's sarcastic and gives him a hard time. He's like, the rest of us, we just went to shore in the boat because it was 100 yards away. We had to row 3 times. It doesn't include this detail, but I like to think they passed him on the way. Hey, dummy, don't drown. Okay? And this is what happens when they get to shore. In verse 9, John writes, when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you've just caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Second thing we got to understand about what Jesus does in our lives is this. Jesus accepts you. Peter hadn't said sorry yet. He did not have his act together. He's still all messed up and full of guilt. And Jesus is standing there on the beach with arms wide open, telling him, shouting to us thousands of years later, you do not have to be perfect before you can come. I love you right in the middle of the space that you are. I know you're messed up. I know you're messed up even more than you do. I know what you've done. I know where you've been. I see those dark places deep inside your soul that you would rather keep hidden and you'd rather nobody else knows about. But the door is open to relationship because I love you. I love you. And the truth about following Jesus is that broken is the only way to come. It's the only way to come. Being a sinner doesn't disqualify you from being a part of the family of Jesus. It doesn't disqualify you from being a part of the church. It's a prerequisite. I love that Peter just jumped in the water and started swimming. I hope that'll be some of your response today. I think Peter did that because for the first time in his life, he finally understood that God's love was bigger than his mistakes. He jumped in the water because he's like, God's love is bigger than my mistakes. What does God think about you? How does he see you? How's he looking at you right now in the middle of your failures? He loves you. He's looking at you with arms wide open, beckoning you to come because he wants to give you peace and cook breakfast. That's what he does. You guys, I talk to so many people. I sit with so many people who used to go to church, who used to believe. Maybe at some point in the past, they went to church, they had grandparents who brought them to church, or they went to some church camp and they accepted Jesus, or they considered themselves followers of Jesus. They would have called themselves Christians. And they tell me, it's not even that I don't believe, it's just, you don't know what I've done. You don't understand where I've been. You don't understand what's happened to me. You don't know who I've become. I can't do that anymore. And so many of us, when we think of God, just constantly hear the screaming condemnation about our guilt. We can feel the frown of heaven. And if that's you this morning, I want you to understand that's not coming from heaven, because look what Jesus did. He didn't stand there on the shore and look at his disciples who had just given up on him and decided they were changing careers and yell, "Morons, what are you doing in the boat? Get back here!" He cooked them breakfast. And he welcomed them back in. And understand, this whole thing, this whole interaction, it didn't just happen chronologically after the resurrection. It happened because of the resurrection. Because of the resurrection. The one who knew no sin took ours upon him. He paid the full price. He got crushed by it. He felt the pain of our mistakes. And then he showed up in the life of a whole bunch of sinners to make sure they understood that it counts for them. He looked at them in the boat and said, hey, come back to shore. I cooked you breakfast. You are forgiven and loved because your sin is buried, but your Savior is not. And as they walk over for breakfast, the bread and the fish are cooking on a charcoal fire. This is pretty cool. There's all kinds of fires in the Bible, from the beginning to the end. Just all different types of fire, all different sources of fire. There's only 2 charcoal fires ever, anywhere, 2. You know where the other one is? It's that fire Peter was standing around trying to warm his hands. We told a little girl that he'd never even met Jesus. Don't think Peter missed that. As soon as he walks up to get some breakfast, he saw the fire. He understood. Jesus built this fire to take Peter back to his worst moment on this planet. And then he talked directly to him. He said this, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. And again, Jesus said, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. This is a crazy conversation. Jesus starts it off by saying, hey, do you love me more than these? What's these? It's the fish. Okay? The Greek grammar says it's the fish. Jesus is like, hey, you were just in the boat, but I had a different plan for you. Which one are you going to choose? Who do you love? Do you love fish or do you love me? Which life, which future are you going to be chasing now? Do you love me more than these? And Peter says, I love you. And then Jesus asks him again, and again he makes him say it 3 times. How many times did Jesus get denied by Peter? 3. Jesus recreates the moment of Peter's denial. Is he being mean? Is he mad? I used to wonder if he was. I don't anymore. I don't anymore, but I used to wonder if it was just like, do you love me? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Are you sure you're sure? Just to help Peter understand the weight of his guilt and sin, because I had this season where I felt like that's what religion was. Every time you screw up, it just grinds it in your face. But that's not what Jesus is doing at all here. The third big thing Jesus does that I want us to see in this story is Jesus restores you. Jesus is restoring Peter. He's walking right back into the wounds of Peter's past in order to take the stuff that had scarred him and turn it into the stuff that shaped him for the future he was created for. He wants Peter to see, and he desperately wants you to see, that what he did for us is bigger than anything we've done or anything that's been done to us. Here's the thing, if Jesus wanted to rub it in, he would point us backwards. But Jesus knows if you live in the past, you will die to your future. And so he points Peter forwards. I believe with all that I am in this moment, he's saving Peter's life. Because if they don't have this uncomfortable conversation, what's going to happen for the rest of Peter's days every time he wakes up to a rooster crowing? You're a failure. You're a liar, you're a cheater, you're messed up, you abandon your friend in his time of need. That's who you are. That's your identity. You can't escape that, Peter. Man, some of us are in the same spot this morning. It's hung up on the worst moments of our past, convinced that they define our present and limit our future, that that's who we are. And Jesus is telling Peter, and he's telling you and me, because of the resurrection, because death is defeated and sin has been paid for, you don't have to be defined. Your identity doesn't have to be wrapped up any longer, not for one more second, in what you have done or what has been done to you. It can be wrapped up in what I did for you. And you can find purpose. You can find purpose. The fourth thing Jesus does for Peter here that he wants to do for you is this: Jesus empowers you. He sends Peter out on a mission. He points Peter forward. He says, this is who you were, but I defined you by my death and resurrection. Now, this is where I want you to go. And he gives him this mission. Tells him, look, it's not always going to be easy, but if you follow me, will you feed my sheep? And as Jesus looks out at all of us in the world and calls us sheep, that's not a compliment. Okay, I don't know if you know a lot about sheep, but I learned this week that sheep will die of dehydration within a few feet of water if they get pointed in the wrong direction and they can't see it. That's true. Sheep are nature's punching bag, okay? They're just, they are, and like, Jesus tells Peter, look, I chased you. I gave my life chasing you. I accept you. I know you're not there yet, but we'll get it together when you come. Come unfinished. And I restored you. I want to heal the wounds of your past. I want to empower you to this mission in the world. There's a world out there that needs a better future. There are sheep out there that need you to stop hiding in the boat and engage. It's this beautiful, incredible moment. But it's Peter. So John tells us that, like so many beautiful, incredible moments, Peter ruins it. Jesus gives him this commission, and then Peter looks at him, and then he looks over at the other disciples, and he goes, what about John? And Jesus says the same thing to Peter here that I say to my kids when they fight. Like, he hit me. Why don't hear? Who's she pulling? No, stop. We'll worry about what she did later. I'm talking to you about you. And Jesus looks at Peter and says, I'm talking to you about you. Will you follow me? Will you accept this gift of a new identity, of grace, of life, and of hope? Will you follow me? Jesus is asking you the exact same thing this morning. He's talking to you about you. Will you follow me? What are you going to do? It's not about what your girlfriend or husband or neighbor or friend or the person sitting next to you is going to do. What are you going to do? I don't care who you are or where you've been or what you've done. Jesus wants to chase, accept, restore, and empower you because he cares. That's a super corny acrostic. And I'm sorry. I'm not that sorry. I'm like a dad and a pastor, so I have a wide cross-section of corny things that amuse me. But I'm a little bit sorry, but I want you to remember it. I want you to know that he chased you down with reckless love and that he's inviting you in, and there's nothing you got to do to get there other than just believe and let him save you. You don't got to be perfect or figure it all out. You just got to confess you're too messed up to earn your own way back to God, and you believe Jesus did it for you. And let me be clear, you don't have to. You don't have to. Jesus is inviting you to this, not compelling you to it. You can choose to live out the rest of your days like Simba in the jungle, allowing your past to haunt you into settling for a life where you hide out from your purpose, chase comfort, and keep trying to convince yourself that this is all it is and this is what you were made for. But you were made for more than just eating the grubs the world keeps tossing your way and trying to convince you are delicious. You were made for more. And the brokenness around you is crying out for you to engage. And if you decide to surrender, to simply allow Jesus to forgive you and heal you and restore you and give you purpose, it will not always be easy. It won't. But you'll find healing and liberation and hope and joy and a life trajectory that is so much better than you ever even imagined. The God who beat death itself can beat your brokenness, and he can reclaim your future and restore you to the relationship with him that you were made for. Jesus is inviting you today. All you got to do is believe. The rest is done. It's finished. It's paid for. So I want to invite you to something today. If you're in this space where you've allowed your past to rob your future, or you've believed that you can't anymore and you aren't anymore, and maybe the God thing is for someone else, or that maybe you got to clean up your act before you can engage. But if you want hope and you want healing and you want forgiveness, because Jesus is chasing you, if you want that, or if you had it and you walked away in the past and you convinced yourself there's no path back for you, I want to invite you to something. I'm going to pray in a minute, and would you all just bow your heads and close your eyes? I'm going to pray. I'm going to invite you, if you want that, just to throw your hand in the air at some point. To throw your hand in the air. Again, Jesus is talking to you about you. It's not anybody else. It's not about what anybody else is doing or is going to do. Right here, right now, I want to invite you to follow. Right here, right now, I want to invite you to come back. We don't know what tomorrow holds. Don't wait. Don't keep settling for bugs. God made you for more. I'm going to give it a minute, but if there's anyone out there who wants to say, I want to cross that line, I believe that Jesus came and died for me, just throw your hand in the air. Again, don't settle. God made you for more. He made you for more than brokenness. He made you for more than settling for a future that is less. All right, let's get excited. We have a God who changes the future and rewrites it for all of us. Would you guys stand with me as I pray? Heavenly Father, thank you so much. Thank you for being a God who chases us and accepts us even in our failure and restores the brokenness of our past and empowers us to a better future. Thank you for the cross. Thank you for beating death so that we could live. We believe you and we trust in you and we give you all that we are and all that we have. And we just thank you, Jesus, for all that you did for us. In Jesus' name, amen.